Good day, I'm Dr. T and welcome to my office. So today I'd like to talk about grading, kind of a 30,000 foot view of grading and areas where the way that we do grading, at least here in the United States in higher ed, has issues, and issues that we want to start thinking about addressing, some as faculty members that we may be able to address, others that are really much more of a university or even university system-wide thing that we need to change. But to do so, we of course need to ask, well, why are we grading? And if we're asking why are we grading, really we need to be asking why are we educating? Education takes a lot of resources, buildings, staff, people, a lot of work on the part of the students. Why are students spending years of their lives doing education other than they were told to? Well, we got a couple of reasons, and there's kind of two classic reasons, neither one of which is mutually exclusive by any means. And individuals will almost certainly have a blend of the two core reasons for education. But they are distinct reasons. They are definitely different. The first is a very intrinsic reason, and that is this idea that education makes one better. Kind of whatever one's general idea of better is, but by learning material, understanding different ways of thought, one can become a better person, a better citizen of the society, better at doing what they need to do, better at conveying their ideas, just in general being a better person. Think kind of Enlightenment ideas. And this is a fairly old idea. Universities have been around for, 800 or so years, depending on exactly how you want to count them. And hey, rich folks sending their kids off to college, a classic thing. Once again, been going on for centuries. The kids are learning various skills like rhetoric, etc. back in the day, as well as networking. And for the well-to-do, it's not what it's who you know. So you've got lots of things to learn there. But it's not until recently that really education has become a part of the middle class and poorer families. Those who maybe need some help paying for this, and society saying, you know what, we're going to help students go to school. We're, as a society, we're going to use taxpayer dollars to pay for kids to go to school. And that's not really about personal growth and enlightenment. It would be nice if it was, but there's really kind of a second reason for education, and this comes much more in the Industrial Revolution. As you have the Industrial Revolution, you need more and more skilled laborers. The jobs are changing, they are evolving. It's no longer a person on a farm doing farm stuff that they learned from their father, who learned it from his father, who learned it from his father, or learned it from their mother, who learned it from her mother, who learned it from her mother. And apprenticeships, etc., they're still a thing, but they're kind of limited, and there's skills that maybe aren't best taught by apprenticeships. Now, it's a misnomer that medieval people were, dumb, illiterate peasants, but there was not the same formal education structured at that time. That is much more of a product of the 19th century with the bringing of Industrial Revolution. Well, the idea here is that if the society can start training their members, kids learn to read, write, do math, etc., they are going to be more valuable employees to their employers. Now, the employers could train these individuals, but that puts the cost on the employer. That person could move away. In general, companies don't want to pay for things, so if they could put the cost off to not them, they will gladly do so. It makes perfect business sense. For the individuals, it's valuable to them if they have more skills, the ability to read, write, etc., then they are able to demand a higher wage and better living conditions. This is the same time where all of a sudden the middle class becomes a thing. Before that, you really didn't have that much of a middle class. And so this idea of education as a ticket into a more productive, better paying work environment is kind of the second approach. Now, the first approach is very intrinsically motivated, to make oneself better. The goal is internal. I want to be better, so I'm going to do education. Whereas the latter goal, I want to be a more profitable employee, I want to earn a higher paycheck, that's a very extrinsic goal. Now, there's kind of an interesting thought when it comes to intrinsic versus extrinsic goals. Intrinsic goals are typically much more powerful. We'll push through and do things, and extrinsic goals, and extrinsic rewards, I should say, can even be demotivating. We're just doing it for the paycheck. However, one can't encourage someone intrinsically. You might be able to grow and nurture some of the intrinsic desires and intrinsic goals, but if you're really trying to get someone to do something because you want more productive workers, extrinsic rewards are kind of the way you have to go. You can't, put something in someone. You can only give them something. You are external to the person. And likewise, while making oneself better is a great goal, being a more profitable worker, let's be honest, that's where the money is. It's all in earning a profit. If society can encourage higher productivity, there's going to be higher taxes, happier voters, more stuff to go around, etc. So the money really is in that second goal, and that is very much an extrinsic motivated goal. Okay, so let's take those two goals and think about how we do assessment, because as you're learning stuff, you are also, by necessity, assessing how you're learning. And there are two general forms of assessment, formative and summative. Formative assessments are trying to help the student learn. The idea is the student does something, you give them feedback, and that feedback helps them grow. The classic quintessential example is, they write a paper and you say, okay, I like how you did this one, you need to work more on this one, your commas are a mess, that kind of thing. And that is formative. They are growing. This one has become kind of growing in popularity as a way of helping the student learn. The alternative formative is what's known as summative. Did you learn the material? Here is a test. Let's see how many questions you can get right. Did you get enough questions right to show that you know the content that we covered? If you didn't, you don't pass, you don't get the extra pay, etc. If you did, great, move on. These are, once again, kind of mapping to those original two goals. Formative is helping the student become better. Summative is showing that they know the skills for a future employer or for a future class, etc., and that they can move on in their education or move on in promotions, etc. Now, both, once again, have merit. Obviously, the more you can learn, the better off you can do later on. That complements. Formative assessment complements the second goal of becoming a better employee because, once again, that aids in the education. As we are looking at the summative assessment, not only does that tell future employers that this student has mastered these skills, it also tells the student that it's okay to continue. If you've ever played a video game, you will almost always notice that there's kind of a growing difficulty curve. As you start playing, the first bit is kind of easy, especially if it's well done. It's not too many choices, and then it gets a little bit harder, a little bit harder, a little bit harder, but you get good with the hardening of the game. But there's an interesting trap that you can run in games, and an interesting trap you can run in life. If you jump too far ahead, where all of a sudden you've been able to get to an area where you're not good enough to be able to do that area, but you're there anyways, and then all of a sudden you just get squashed. You get out of your leagues. Then you become frustrated and you quit. So a good video game designer will intentionally prevent you from doing that. There's this classic level in Baldur's Gate 2 where it's in a low-level zone, but it's this next one step over a very high-level zone. So you could wander in there, and they don't want you getting frustrated by going through this level. So instead, right as you cross in, right immediately, two ridiculously hard enemies that you have to defeat in order to proceed through. This way, if you're a low-level player, you're not going to get all the way through there, get frustrated, get lost, get stuck, and quit the game. You're just like, okay, do not cross the bridge. Come back to that later, kind of thing. And with education, it's the same deal. You don't want to progress a student up through harder and harder classes when they don't have the core content. There is this horrible trap students can get into, especially when they've been passed along, where they've gone through whatever class, level 1, whatever class, level 2, whatever class, level 3, they don't have the mastery of the content. They go to level 4. Now, they don't have the background content. They cannot pass the 4th class, so they have to take it over again. Well, they can't pass the 4th class the second time through because the stuff they need to learn isn't in the 4th class. It's assumed that it's already been learned. They need to go back to the 1st class and start over, but that's not how classes work. So you get this situation where they take it over and over again until they either quit or are forced out of the class, and then they don't get the degree. This is a bad experience for everyone involved. So what you want to do is have gatekeeping so that, okay, the students got the masteries, then they can go on. This way you don't have a bad experience. This is the same reason belts exist in martial arts. You don't want a sensei that doesn't really know that student, visiting sensei, to think that, oh yeah, I can just throw this student around, they can know what to do, and accidentally whack their head because they just started Tuesday. So you want those summative assessments. Those are absolutely critical, but the formative assessments are very, very helpful and they complement nicely. Okay, so with this said, kind of with this context, what's wrong with our current system? Well, for starters, the traditional grading system, ABCDF, has been around for about 100 years or so. I'll let you dive into the history of this one. It kind of starts in the early 20th century-ish, and there's some kind of evolution going on here that I'm not going to dive into. For starters, this is very extrinsic. And so extrinsic rewards or extrinsic motivators, getting a good grade, do tend to kill intrinsic motivators. So there's some interesting research where if you've got a paper the student has done, if you provide feedback and a grade, the student doesn't read the feedback. If you provide a grade, they see the grade. If you provide both, they see the grade. If you provide just the feedback, then they'll actually read the feedback. So you get this kind of counteracting effect on formative assessment. So there's a technique known as ungrading. Actually, ungrading is going to describe a lot of what I'm describing now. It's a very big umbrella approach, but the general idea is you're not really focusing on these letter grades so that you can help foster formative assessment. Students will actually look at the feedback and adapt. If you've seen Zoe B's video on grading, this is very much her focus, is that the external letter grades pretty much squash internal intrinsic motivation. Now, the qualm I have with Zoe B here is that the whole point of education, that second point is really the core of why most students are doing education. It's for the future pay, and so we're already externally motivated. So that's kind of, that bridge has been burned already. There are educational platforms that are very much intrinsically motivated. You've probably seen Skillshare, Brilliant, Wondrium advertised on all of the educational YouTubers, not to mention educational YouTube, CuriosityStream, Magellan, all kinds of edutainment, if it were. But what you'll find is quite often, these are not quite the same push. You're not going to pay thousands of dollars to do these like you would a college education, because college education is an investment because of the second goal of better future pay. So college is quite often externally motivated to start with. Now, the other issue with the ABCDF approach is that it's kind of like a 5-star system. It's 5 ratings. What does a C mean? We don't have a great universal agreement of what each letter grade actually means. What is meant by a C? If we are thinking of a summative assessment, what is the part where the student has reached all learning objectives to a reasonable degree, or all core learning objectives to a reasonable degree? Is that a C? In the old days, that kind of was a C. The average grade was a C. But now grade inflation has taken place. Is that a B? Is that an A? Is anything less than an A really a failing grade? What do those letter grades mean? And different stakeholders have different opinions. When you're looking at scholarships, I'm in the state of Georgia. We have the Hope Scholarship, an awesome program, but if the student doesn't maintain a 3.0 grade point average, so basically straight Bs, they've got some wiggle room. There's a couple of options there. But that basically means they lose their funding. If dropping below a B and dropping below that 3.0 is effectively failing out of college. Even though it's not actually failing out of college, you have to go much lower than that. But if you lose your funding, you can't pay for it. So what do these grades actually mean? Additionally, let's say we say a C is 70% completion or something. Does that mean the student has proficiency but not mastery in all the learning objectives? Or does that mean the student has proficiency in, say, 70% of the learning objectives, or near mastery in 70% of the learning objectives, and does not understand the other ones, so complete lack of competency in the other ones? Do I want to hire an engineer who can design a house perfectly except for the foundation? They can't do the foundation, they always mess it up. Yikes, I'd much rather the person who could design an okay house with an okay foundation kind of scenario. So we've got this next problem of what on earth do these grades actually mean? We don't have a synergy with the stakeholders. And you see this with like Amazon reviews and Yelp reviews, etc. And trying to say, okay, what is a 4-star? Is that this product was bad, but not very bad? Or is that like, it was fine? Well, if you look at social media, you look at a couple other retailers, there is kind of a moving trend. Platforms such as Reddit, YouTube, and Steam, the video game distribution platform, instead of having a 5-star rating system of some flavor, is simply an up or a down vote. Much simpler. You either like it well enough to say you liked it, or you don't like it well enough to say you don't like it. Sometimes I do wish there was like I've got mixed opinions, but by keeping it simple, you get a lot more clarity, and this does seem to be working a bit better for these sites. Likewise, instead of having an ABCDF grading system, you could simply have pass-fail. The student has obtained sufficient mastery in all the learning objectives to move on, or they didn't. Seems reasonable. This is actually found a lot in places like med schools. You want your doctor to know all the basics. They don't have to be amazing, but they need to know everything. You don't want a doctor that knows everything great except for, thinks your foot is your kidney. That would be bad. So this is one approach. Now, as an instructor, switching from a letter grade-based system to a pass-fail-based system is probably not something you can do. You might be able to advocate for it, but almost certainly that is beyond your pay grade, not something you're going to be able to do. Personally, that is something I would really like to see happen, because then the next reforms are much easier. It's much more clear-cut. Well, you passed. You got the core learning objectives. You're capable of moving on. We can tell other stakeholders that, yes, you know this content. Not having this vague, well, they got to see. Whatever that happens to be. Now, whether or not you're able to move into a pass-fail system, which probably as an instructor, you're not going to be able to make that call unilaterally. You've got a few other options, though, on thinking about how you're doing assessment to kind of reframe that so that it makes more sense and is a little bit more clear-cut. For starters, once again, if you watch Zoe B's video, there is kind of the ungrading approach. We're going to focus on the formative assessment. And doing this one, we're trying to take the stakes out, trying to have the students really kind of master the material. So in the US educational system, we typically have a lot of small assignments and then maybe kind of a final. Historically, it was quite often just no assignments, no formative assessment at all, and just one big summative assessment at the end. And that's still done in other places. My understanding that's fairly common in the UK. I have no experience with the UK educational system other than watching random YouTubers. But from my understanding from those random YouTubers, that's the way it goes. But with formative assessments, you can run into this interesting issue. It's like, okay, student goes through, they do poorly on the first one, poorly on the second one, poorly on the third one. If those grades start compounding, well, now all of a sudden the student's doing poorly at the beginning, maybe they're able to resurrect it at the end, but now their grade is already sunk. Or if the student doesn't do it for some random reason, life happened. That's not really reflecting how well they've grown, they've matured, and they've got their content. They understand things better now, but you're now penalizing them for early failures. We tell people that failure is a good thing. You fail and then try again, fail and try again. I even got a poster basically saying there's no ideas fully formed, fail and fail faster. But we're punishing students for failing by having these small assessments all set up to then build up and add. Now, alternatively, we could have one big final assessment where it's make or break, high stakes, but that really has not been the favor in the US. So one approach is to say, okay, let's try and redo those. Or actually, I should say one approach is that you lower the failing option. So K-12, you can't typically get less than 50%. You do anything at all, or even don't do anything, you still get a 50% on the assignment. You can't get a 0. That way, at least it doesn't compound nearly as badly. Well, another approach is instead of doing weird things with math, which I'm never a fan of doing weird things with math. I understand why, I just don't like it, is to say, okay, well, here are your formative assessments. You can redo them. In a perfect world, you can redo them an infinite number of times until the class is over. You know, basically until the end of the class, you can just keep redoing them. And if you're able to do them well enough, then you're good and you don't have to keep redoing them. But until you do them at a mastery level, you just have to keep redoing them. Okay, so you can probably see the problem with this. That's going to be a lot of work for everyone involved. The student is going to have a ton of work trying to redo the thing over and over again. The instructor has to grade that thing and then needs to discuss with the student why they didn't do perfect work. This is an approach that definitely has merit, but definitely has some issues, especially with scalability. This is going to be a lot of work for everyone involved. So if it's a large class, the instructor really isn't going to be able to do this. And this could become a major time sink for the students. Additionally, students may very well be like, okay, why don't I just not try until the very end and then I'll just do it at the very end. So this is an approach that has some issues, but it's still a valid approach. Once again, if you watch Zoe B's video, this is kind of the approach she is arguing for. And this is typically what's referred to by ungrading. The student does the assignment, they get feedback, they redo the assignment, they get feedback, they redo the assignment, they get feedback, until their assignment is kind of a master level. Then they kind of discuss with the professor what grade they should be getting for the class if it's not a pass-fail system. There's merit. If I'm teaching biochemistry lab again, I plan on doing a system similar to this. Okay, everyone, let's write a report. Okay, I'm going to give you feedback on the report. Let's try it again. Let's make it better. And then at the end of the class, give me a one-page letter of what grade you deserve in this class and why. And the advantage of this is, you know, especially like a biochemistry lab, the experiments are ones that aren't guaranteed to work. Or very small oopses could completely cause the experiment to fail. So I want to create a fail-safe environment, ones where the students feel free to fail and fail frequently, because they're still going to learn. They're going to learn more from their failures than they are going to learn from their successes. Also, I want them to be able to take risks. I want them to be able to, say, try and extract an enzyme from a plant that they don't know that that enzyme is going to be easily extracted from. You know, I was having them extract an enzyme, and for the life of me, I cannot remember at this second what that enzyme is. It may well be sitting there. From spinach. Yeah, good luck. There's like next to none of it in spinach. And they failed several times. That group of students did. But they learned a ton doing that. So I don't want them to fail the class, even though they weren't successful at their final project. They were actually successful at learning. So this gives a lot of flexibility, a lot more risk-taking, a lot more freedom to fail. And the biochemistry lab, for me, is a small lab. You know, we're talking 10 students, maybe 15. So not some horrible swarm where if I'm meeting with every student, say 10 minutes a week, that's going to be a big deal. Okay, so traditional ungrading may be a great option for you. I personally feel like it's going to be a good option for more of the capstone classes, ones that have a little bit more subjective learning objectives. Things where you want students to take risks, make portfolios, stuff like that. Not ones that are going to be, you know, very clear cut, and also classes that are not going to be too big, because this is going to be a ton of work. On the other side, though, you've got other classes that have very clear-cut learning objectives. And they potentially are going to be quite a bit larger. So a lot of my introductory chemistry courses are going to be in this category. So rethinking kind of that standard letter grade system and how we go about it with just straight up percentages, another approach is what's known as specs grading. So in specs grading, the idea here is that you're still allowing failure and repeat. So the students are able to do an assessment and they're able to, if they don't succeed, do it again. Now, with this one, we're going to be very open with the students. Here is what we're looking for you. You need to be able to solve a percent yield calculation or something like that. So they know what they're getting into. They have a pretty good idea of what they're going to see. It's going to test a specific learning objective, and then it's going to be graded all or nothing. You either get it right or you don't. For a math-based course, hey, math is either right or it's not. Let's just be honest. The bridge stayed up or the bridge fell down. So you either met the objective or you didn't. This makes it a lot easier for the faculty member to grade. If all I'm doing is looking to make sure the math looks right and the right answer's on there, I can get by these real quick. If I'm spending time trying to figure out partial credit, that takes a lot more time. And also, once again, what is the real value of almost getting the right answer? The bridge almost didn't fall down? Once again, not the same thing as meeting the goal. So this one, very transparent. Now, the student then has at least one more opportunity. Okay, they didn't get the percent yield right. They know they need to work on percent yield because they didn't get that assessment right. They work on it. They've got another opportunity in a few weeks to do that. This way, no one failure is catastrophic for the students. They get feedback on what they've got right and what they've got wrong, and it is very clear cut. Then you can set up, depending on how you want to convert this to a letter grade, if you're using letter grades. If you didn't pass, fail, then simply, here are the learning objectives you need to pass this class. Here are maybe a few more that I'd like you to pass, but here are the one you need to pass. If you're doing letter grades, then it would be, maybe these are the ones you have to get a C. These are the ones, these more you have to get a B. These more you have to get an A. That kind of thing. Or, what percentage of these, depending on how you want to transition this from the specs assignments, which are a pass-fail, into a letter grade-based assignment. There's a couple options. In general, you've got a couple of ways of rethinking grading. I've done some of the specs grading. I really like it. There's a couple other ones I didn't get into, like contract grading, which is problematic. It's kind of the precursor to a lot of the grading systems that I talked about, and I'll let you read more on it. It's actually strongly discouraged because it's like, okay, I'm going to work towards a C. I can't get more than a C because I contracted to get just a C in the course, but I don't have to work that hard in the course, which is really kind of weird. And yeah, once again, contract grading, I'm not going to go into it because it's pretty much no longer a valid option for most educational settings because it's got a lot of problems that either the ungrading or the specs grading does a nice job of addressing. So with that said, actually, let's leave you with a few resources. First, Zoe B's video on grading as a scam. I have a lot of issues with some of her content in the video, but it's not like I actually disagree. It's more of I think her spin's a little bit different, but it's a good one to watch. She goes into some more details. Another one is Specs Grading by Linda B. Nelson and Ungrading, edited by Susan B. Blum. I do apologize. I'm pretty sure I've butchered some names in that list. So with that said, I hope I've given you a few ideas on ways to rethink grading for those courses that you are doing some radical transformations on. And have a wonderful day.